Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Bloom the Podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to episode 26, and we are so happy that you guys are back. How you doing, Ashley?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing good. Can't complain. Got sparkling ice on the table. We're back here in the Bloom studio, getting ready to record another episode. So we actually have a fun one today. I'm excited for this one, and actually, we got a response in our comments from one of the previous episodes that we did on episode 24 about kind of navigating relationships with Christian people and kind of in the sphere of like church and, you know, that whole deal. But we actually got a comment. Shout out to Chris, who responded and left us a comment. Just so you guys know, if you guys want to give us topics you want us to talk about or have questions for us, feel free to message us in any of our social medias or on YouTube in the comments. Mm-hmm. We can either give you a shout out if you want, or if you want it to be more of an anonymous thing, we can do that for you guys as well. We just want to know what you guys want to hear us talk about. So feel free to drop them, like I said, in any of our social medias or in any of the comments. But let's see here. Chris wanted to see us talk about Christians living in the secular world. And kind of not just being in the Christian bubble all the time. So I think that's a really interesting topic, and I feel like a lot of us relate to it, obviously. So I guess I'd pass it to you to kind of start. What were, I guess, some of your first experiences with being outside of the Christian bubble? What was that like for you?
I feel like I've had quite a few of those because I started dancing when I was like 12, so that's automatically puts you in a secular place, and the dance studio is definitely like pretty out there, you know, sometimes. So and I was pretty young, so I remember just kind of like thinking like, oh, like these kids are bad, you know, like that little kid being like, you know, I'm a good person. These people aren't good people, you know?
Hooligans.
Yeah, like, I just remember feeling, like, so good about myself because I was just like, wow, I'm nothing like these crazy children.
Yeah.
But I'd say, like, one of, like, my most real experiences when I was, like, old enough to kind of, like, be like, oh, this is interesting was when I got my first job. So, when I worked at PacSun in Los Angeles, I was, like, 16.
Okay.
Which wasn't that long ago, like almost 3 years ago. But
ages ago, you know.
So long. But I mean, obviously, like I've dealt with things before that. But that was like my first thing where it's like, you're in here all alone with these people, stuck with them for hours on the daily. You know? So that experience was definitely interesting. Like, it's just a lot, you know? And like, one of the biggest things that came to mind was how I could like show that I was different, you know, and I definitely think they noticed it for sure, because, you know, they'd ask you questions about stuff you don't really want to talk about, and you're like, nah, you know?
Lots of inappropriate questioning.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun experience. I'll just say that.
Yeah. I would say same as well. I didn't do a lot of like recreational stuff like you did with like dance. I did basketball when I was like 15 or 16. But a lot of my childhood, like, I didn't get super involved in stuff. So I was just kind of like, I'm here to do the thing and then I'm leaving. So I didn't really interact that much. But like you, I think the first, like, bubble burst, as you would call it for the Christian, was also when I got my first job at the portrait studio. Lots of interesting things happened there. And kind of like you said, being around those people constantly for 8 hours a day, I was like, oh man, like this is crazy. And, you know, you don't want to be like super judgy when you first start, like, and like come off like the outcast person. But like you said, you do want to stand out, not to a fault where you end up losing your job or like, you know, something like that. But, you know, there definitely should be a clear distinction there between you and everyone else at the job. But it was difficult. It was really difficult because we don't have much in common with those people, you know, apart from like really surfacey things. But obviously you can't talk to them about church. You can't talk to them about any of that stuff. And that's the hard part too, because that's the majority of your life, especially your social life. So, it's that Wednesday night, Sunday night. Those are the only days to socialize for the Christian kid.
Yeah. And like sometimes like it can just be super insulting and you can't say anything, Like I remember when I worked at PacSun, like I've heard like awful music and awful things in music, but I had never heard something so awful in my entire life. Like I was like, who would ever listen to this? Like I knew what like unbelievers listen to. Yeah. But not this. Like this was a whole different level. And I just had to sit there and take it in. Like when we were closing, they were blasting it and I was like, I'm gonna go to hell for this one. For even hearing it.
That was crazy too, because that makes me think of a funny story, because we dealt with at the Portrait Studio, we dealt with like a lot of little kids, because we were doing portraits for like 1-year-olds and toddlers and things like that. And whoever got there first was allowed to play music. And the one person that got there, bless his soul, he started playing like the non-clean version of Kendrick Lamar. And I love Kendrick Lamar, but not time and place for everything. That was not the time or the place. As we're doing photo shoots of 5-year-olds for kindergarten, it's just humble going in the back. I was like, this is awful. But yeah, it's definitely like it's almost like overexposure, because like you either like watch TV, you watch movies, listen to music, you watch YouTube, and that's kind of like your, hate to say like introduction, but that's like the safe way of you kind of seeing what the world is like. But when you're out there like interacting with it, it's a lot harder to navigate. Yeah. So did you feel that as well, or did you feel like it was just like, stay away from me? Like,
nah, I feel like it's hard, especially in the workplace, because you want to be like friendly with the people you work with, because I mean working is so much more fun if you're actually friends with the people. So it's like hard to like balance out like how much you like take in when you're hanging out with them and how much you're like, okay, I should probably distance myself from you at this point because you're being crazy, Yeah. So that was kind of like a hard balance, because you want them to like you, and if you act too different, they'll be like, oh, she's like goody two shoes and we don't want to hang out with her, So I think
you're just snitching on everyone constantly.
I think it's like a really fine balance. It's like, it's really hard to find, Yeah. I don't know. It's a hard one.
Yeah. Because I feel like definitely when I first started, I was kind of like, do not talk to me. Yeah. I was like, when I went on my lunch, I'd just go in my car. I was just like, I wanted to be removed from everything. Yeah. And I don't know if I just got used to it, or if I got callous to it, or if I just kind of got over it. But as you keep doing it, you have to eventually interact, like you said, with the people. And you don't want to like become that person that's a goody two shoes and all that. Right. But that's kind of the, I guess, the goal in some regards, is to,
sadly it is
is to like be that person, so that way they ask you about it. And you want to be that person that's like so different that it makes people want to know more. Yeah.
And I think that's just the thing us Christians have to get over, is that wanting to be liked. Yeah. Like that's always going to be something that probably every Christian struggles with, because the reality is most people won't like you. If you're truly showing like Christ through your actions and stuff, then most likely you will not be liked.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was saying on the episode that we talked about this last. When you're in the world, you're either becoming more like them or you're showing Christ, Yeah.
And you can't just like hang in the middle and be like, yeah, I'll be kind of Christian, kind of not. You know, it's like Christ or nothing type thing.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And that also makes me think too, is because we try to blend in so much.
Oh yeah.
We're always trying to like go with the flow and like go with the waves, and not trying to stick out, because we don't want to face that criticism or the mocking or the jokes and all the other stuff that comes with actually looking like a Christian in the world. Right. And I'm no, exception to this. I definitely have tried, especially in the past, to kind of fit with the culture of the job and to try and get liked by everybody. And that's just definitely not the right mindset to have, because that's where it gets dangerous. And, once they can't tell you apart, you've already lost.
Right. Yeah. And it's just like, it's kind of like fun to like see that, like, I mean, sometimes it turns out completely different. Like, I was at a job and I was working with one of my friends, Sophia, and she is the sweetest person on the planet, and I feel like she like really reflects Christ like 24/7. But it's so funny because at work everybody loves her. Like, that's like their favorite person, because like she's just so sweet. And it's like she's not hiding the fact that like she's reflecting Christ, and like people love that because like reflecting Christ means like you're kind and you're like patient and gentle and all these things that people sometimes want to have in the workplace but don't get because other people just literally don't care, Yeah. So it's kind of fun to like see how it can go the opposite way too. Like, you're so afraid of like showing great qualities that like people normally love,
Yeah.
Like, you never meet a more genuinely loving person than when you meet believers who actually, know what, like, love is,
Right. And one other thing, too, and we can do a separate episode on this, but one thing about being a Christian in the workplace is you're typically going to have, and this is if you have the right mindset, of course, you're typically going to have, I want to say, like, I don't want to preach like health and wealth prosperity gospel, but you'll typically have more success because you're working unto the Lord and you're going to be diligent about your work, and your employer is going to see that, because if you're working unto the Lord, you're giving your all, not for the praise of your employers and your coworkers, but because that's what the Bible calls us to do, is to give our all. The Bible says you don't work, you don't eat. We're supposed to be working unto Him.
Right. With a good attitude.
Right. And that will ultimately benefit you in the long run, no matter what it is that you're doing. So that's one of the other benefits that the workplace receives when they have a Christian in their work, in their environment. They're going to be giving their all. They're going to be trying to be of service. And like you said, we should be exposing those qualities that should be most prominent in believers' lives. That's the love, that's the kindness, that's the willingness to serve, the selflessness, all those things that kind of encompass what we're supposed to look like to the world.
Right.
The workplace definitely benefits from that.
Right. And it's so funny, like, talking about, like, the half-hearted, like, oh, like, I'm a Christian at the workplace, but then I'm also kind of not a Christian at the workplace. Yeah. I was watching a influencer YouTuber yesterday, and she was saying how she was doing, like, a questions and answers thing, and people were saying, like, you're putting your religion on other people because she's Christian. And she was saying, like, oh, like, that's my biggest fear, like, when I put stuff out there that, like, you guys will think I'm, like, putting it on you, but it's really just for my Christian followers. And she's like, and, like, one of my friends even told me the other day, like, oh, like, we've been friends for like 2 years and you've never even like asked me like about God or anything like that. So I don't think I'm like, putting it on. Red flag. Yeah, and I was like, okay, you're sitting here and you say you're a Christian YouTuber / influencer, but you like don't care about totally putting that off so that people will watch you or like not get upset with you.
Yeah.
And that's when it gets tricky, when you start making an exception to like put that part of you away because you're like, well, this could ruin something for me.
Yeah.
I might lose a couple followers if I, be like, hey, well, I'm a Christian, so, And this is
a little bit of a tangent, so my apologies, but that makes me think of something that I've been thinking about for a while as well, is Lecrae. Lecrae is a Christian artist, He's done great things for the Christian hip-hop community and a lot of other things, but there is a trend that I don't agree with in his music, and that is the constant collaborations with pagan artists. Now, feel free to let us know in the comments what you guys think about this, but for me personally, I feel like there is no business making a song with Ty Dolla $ign on your Christian rap album.
Were they rapping about Christian things?
They're not. They're just rapping about random stuff. Like Ty Dolla $ign doesn't curse in the song, but Ty Dolla $ign doesn't have anything to contribute to a Christian rap record. Right. You know what I mean? Or
He's
YOK
his
Cyrus.
reputation into a Christian artist.
Right, especially with someone like Lecrae who has the clout that he has. Use that to bolster up other Christian artists in your community.
He doesn't need anybody else to help him get famous.
Right, like you already won a Grammy. Like, why do you need to make songs with all these secular artists? And blend in with them.
When you get a taste of like the world, like now that he's won a Grammy, he wants to be like with all the other people, you know, like
yeah. And I'm not trying to throw shade at Lecrae. I like Lecrae's music, but I just feel like that's one of those things where talking about the workplace and kind of bringing that in is once you start to blend in like that. And if a non-believer was to hear a song with Lecrae and Ty Dolla $ign, do you think anyone's going to be like, oh, Lecrae, yeah, he's a Christian? No, you won't. You know, the company you keep says a lot about you.
It's kind of like the 21 Pilots thing. Like, they're known as, like, Christian, like, you know, people. Like, everyone's like, oh, you know, 21 Pilots is Christian. But then, like, you're like, oh, but the drummer's married to Debbie Ryan. You know, and it kind of throws it off.
Oh, gosh.
Like,
I didn't even know that.
Where, it's like mind blown, you know?
Yeah.
So that can... Yeah, there's definitely 2 feet and they're in totally different puddles of water.
And you can't do that. You're either all in one camp or you're all in the other camp. So I would say, you know,
be all in.
Stand out if you can. It's better to stand out than to blend in. Right. If you're gonna choose one of the two. You know, if you're on the fence, it's better to be looked at as the crazy Christian person than the one who professes to be a Christian but looks just like everybody else.
Right. And I think now, like, maybe it'd be good to like touch on the relationships, like friendships, and maybe even relationships with people who are not believers.
Before we get into that, though, we've got to do our ad for Sparkling Ice, y'all. We still haven't even got them to respond yet, guys, so we need to up the ante with tagging them in the comments because we need that sponsorship. Hello, Sparkling Ice, guys. But yeah, you were about to actually bring up something super interesting, talking about relationships, friendships, and all that. So, in reference to that, what are some of your first thoughts about either having like good, like really close non-Christian friends, and even the idea of being in a relationship with someone that isn't a Christian?
All right. So, as far as friendships go, I think having those friendships can be really good because it gives you so much opportunity to share the gospel. And I think that needs to be the main goal, though. You can't go into this friendship and be like, yeah, I'm just going to keep the other stuff hush hush, you know?
Yeah.
Like, your goal in that friendship should be to share the gospel, because if you are friends with this person, that means you care about them. And if you care about them, that means you care about their soul. And if you care about their soul, you see where I'm getting at here.
I do.
Like, you should help them with their final destination, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
and I think that a good part of that is living out your testimony, and not to bring it back to what we were talking about before, but not hiding the things that you do as a believer. Because, you know, sometimes, because a lot of the times that when I've made friends that are non-Christian, it's from the workplace. And people are like, what did you do this weekend? And 9 out of 10 times I found myself being like, yeah, hung out with some friends, you know, went down to LA, blah, blah, blah. And then that's it. Instead of what really happened and being like, I went to Bible study, I went to church, heard a great message, and hung out with some friends after.
Here's what the message was.
You know what I mean? We're so weird about like saying those things in front of non-believers. I'm, you know, for myself, I know that's because of the fear of judgment or whatever it's going to be. But those things are really great, especially if you have people that you're around a lot, kind of letting them know what your life really looks like. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that's important because, like you said, the ultimate goal is to care for their souls. And you can do that in a kind of subconscious way by living out your testimony and not being ashamed of the things that you do as a believer.
Right.
So,
I definitely agree. And I think, like, that's when it gets hard, is I think when people have best friends that are unbelievers. I have to question you a little bit and say, what do you talk about where you feel like that person is your best
Yeah, what are you
friend?
gaining from that relationship?
Yeah, if you're a believer, then Christ is the most important thing in your life. And if you can't talk about the most important thing in your life with your best friend, then like,
yeah,
and that kind of leads into relationship. That is the biggest thing. What do you see in a person where you're willing to date them and they have no care for the most important thing in your life?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's tough too, because kind of what you were saying on episode 24, kind of this where this episode is stemming off that, but you were saying how sometimes it feels like people are nicer at the workplace and at the other places rather than the church. And when it comes to relationships, there's been some times where, I mean, obviously the world has no care of flirting or doing anything. It's not like the world, you're not a human. The world is going to give you action at times.
They're going to give you exactly what you want.
And sometimes it's going to be like something you've never had before. And it's like the comment we got, it's like that bubble, it gets popped. You're in the world and it's like, okay, how do I respond to this?
Right.
And it can be tempting to engage in those things because it's right there in front of you, and it's so easy.
Right.
It's so easy.
But I think it's one of those things where you really have to sit down and question yourself. Like, where am I spiritually if I'm so attracted to someone who wants nothing to do with God?
Yeah.
You know, and that's like a hard thing to do. Like, obviously people are attracted to unbelievers. Someone could be a really attractive person, but like, I feel like if you really like someone for their personality, then it shouldn't be an unbeliever. Like, you should really sit down and question why you like that person as a person if they want nothing to do with God, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing, man.
Yeah, that's really difficult, because that ultimately has to be the number one criteria for any relationship that you have. And I feel like sometimes we make it very secondary and almost third in line to other things that we see or things that get thrown at us. And yeah, like you said, you really got to check yourself, be honest with yourself. And like I said, it can't be tempting because it is right there and it's so easy. And the world is always looking to set traps for you.
Right. You should see it as that.
Because that's what it is. Yeah. And because it can be so constant at times, you know, it is hard to keep saying no and to keep saying no. But that's something as believers we're called to do. And those are the best times to minister, is, you know, to kind of flip those situations and say, almost like flirt and convert. What do you think about that tactic?
Yeah, that's a hard no for me. I feel that as like, I mean, sometimes like I've seen it. Like I've seen it, and it's like, I'm not going to be like, well, you shouldn't date them now that they're a Christian because they weren't before, you know?
Yeah.
But like, it really has to be like a genuine like switch that person made, not just because of you, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes that's evident, sometimes that's not, and you can kind of tell with the people where it wasn't happening, you
Absolutely.
know? But I think people really need to think of the consequences. Dating someone who is an unbeliever will change you. You will start doing things you probably shouldn't be doing. You'll start changing in your thought process and, like, you know, start probably thinking that certain things are okay that are definitely not okay.
Yeah.
And I think also, like, I don't know, I just feel like they're just going to bring you down spiritually because they're not helping you grow.
Absolutely.
And so you're just going to be sitting there in the same spot.
And I mean, the Bible is explicitly clear on those types of relationships. Like, they're not supposed to be
unequally yoked.
Right. Like, we all know that verse, and it's there for a reason, because if you're unequally yoked, it's going to be them just pulling you down the entire time. Like, it's not healthy for your spiritual walk. And like you said, you're going to find yourself in some very precarious situations because the world doesn't have those standards, those guidelines, and those, you know, that moralness to them when it comes to abiding by the Bible and what the Lord deems to be pure. Yeah. And that's just, it's so sketchy.
There's like no way you guys can understand each other long term, because like being a Christian changes the way you view everything.
Yeah.
And so if that person views everything differently then literally what is there that you are on the same page about? There's literally going to be pretty much nothing.
You know what also I think is sometimes the appeal? Sometimes the appeal is it's not in the Christian bubble. And I think that's somewhat what Chris was trying to get at with the comment there, is because I think there's a very strong appeal to something that's completely contrary to what you've seen your entire life. And I know for me, being homeschooled and kind of not having a lot of involvement with worldly stuff until I was a little bit older, there is that really strong appeal to this is completely different.
Yeah.
It's new, it's exciting, so I definitely understand that as well, but you have to be very careful and you have to check yourself constantly and just be honest, why am I here and what am I going to gain from this? And is this going to honor the Lord in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, and what message does that send to the person that you're talking to at the moment? You're
Right.
saying you're a believer and that Christ is everything, and maybe you're not saying that, and that's a problem. But if you're saying that and then you're going to flirt and date this person, that person's gonna think you're not serious about what you just said, because you're willing to go against everything you just said for this person.
Yeah.
And so they're not gonna get a clear message of oh yeah, this chick really believes in the Bible, or this guy really believes in the Bible,
Yeah.
they're gonna be oh, they're willing to put that off for me, so let's go.
Well, because people, and Dad has always said this, people will only do things to people they know they can get away with it with. And I remember at an old job, someone was flirting with me or whatever, but they told me, they're well, I know you wouldn't date me because you all about church and God and stuff. And I was I'm glad you know that. I'm glad that's clear for you, because you're 100% right.
Still the case.
Yeah. So if you're projecting Christ in your life, the world will see it. And it doesn't matter if you're coming out of the Christian bubble or whatever. If you're projecting that, the world will catch on, and there's still going to be some people that are going to test you and that are going to push you. Right. But ultimately, they'll know what you're about. And it's funny because you can almost start to see the room change just for you. There's been a couple times where people will try not to use swear words around me just because they know how I feel about it, because I don't swear. And there will be other times where people are talking about something super inappropriate, and they'll be oh, we know you don't talk about that. And then they'll kind of shift the conversation. So if you are very clear with the things that you will engage in and won't engage in, I feel sometimes there'll be adaptation to that. Right. And that can be nice.
I remember I had some friends who went to church, and one of them said, I've never met somebody, he was talking about me, he's I've never met somebody who didn't cuss before. And I believe he was talking about the entire group of kids from church. And that was shocking to me, you never know the influence you're making. And never once was I don't think it ever crossed his mind oh, she's a goody two shoes or anything like that. But instead it was wow, that's really interesting,
yeah.
And it's just really cool to see that and to know okay, I didn't give into this, and this is what people see, and they're oh, wow, you're making a difference.
Yeah. And I think that's where the temptation needs to curve, because I think the Christian bubble it's a gift and a curse, so to speak, but you want that to be your regular. You want the Christian sphere to be where you spend the majority of your time. If you're constantly trying to get out of the Christian bubble, why? What are you going to get from being outside of it that you can't get being in it?
Right. And I think, honestly, this goes for a ton of people, but I feel the excuse most people make for themselves to get into these relationships or to have these friendships is oh, I feel so strongly that I really like this person, or this and that, and God wouldn't not want me to be with this person because I feel it so strongly that I love them, or that I really like them, or
if you guys have ever said that.
You know what I'm saying though, you just feel it so strongly on your heart that you're God has to be telling me to go for this, right?
Yeah.
God has to be telling me to flirt and convert, or God has to be telling me that I need to have this friendship because this person's just like me and I love hanging out.
We get along so well.
Yeah, and That is so no. That is like God testing you and you're totally just falling for it, you know?
Yeah.
Your feelings of liking someone who isn't a believer, do not make excuses for that. God is not telling you to like that person.
Where I'm from, we call that lust. That's what we call it where I'm from. Yeah. But I don't know about y'all.
People be trusting their feelings, man. Like, God is telling me something. Like, bro, just because you pray about it and you still feel like you really like that person does not give you a go-ahead.
Like, I did pray one time and nothing's changed since, so I'm going for it.
Exactly. It's like, did you ever think maybe this is a trial for you?
Yeah.
You know, like, maybe you're going to go through a really hard time and a heartbreak because maybe you did love that person, but you're saying no to that because you love God even more.
Yeah.
Like, what a testimony that is.
Yeah.
To share
and
with people.
That's right, because, like, if you were to have, engaged in something, but you were to pull away and say, I appreciate you as a person, but I cannot engage in this with you because you are not on the same page with me spiritually, and this goes against my beliefs as a Christian. That sends a strong message because that person's like, oh wow, this person is really serious about this. Even if you messed up for a partial time and you did engage with this person for however long, the fact that you were able to come to and pull out and be like, okay, this is
sometimes
not
that's
good.
Even more like of an example because it's like so hard to stop yourself mid something.
Because as we all know, the feelings are strong, and you don't necessarily control how you feel about everything. Yeah. So that's what people need to understand. Like, you may feel a certain way, but that doesn't mean that's what you're supposed to be feeling.
Right. And God sometimes like really like blesses your like efforts. Like, I think actually mom said, I believe that she got saved first, like slightly before dad did. Mm-hmm. And she had to be willing to give him up because they were in a relationship because she wasn't sure if he was going to be a believer or not. And what happened? He became a believer on his own. Ba-bam, they're married. Like, God sometimes blesses the fact that you're willing to do anything because you love him.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely. I mean, because that just shows where our heart is really at.
Right.
And that shows that we're prizing him above all other worldly things.
Because he's literally, like, the main reason for everything. Everything is side
That's why we live. That's our purpose for being on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And, to be living that out and to be turning stuff down as hard as it may be, that's what we're called to do. Yeah. And when you do that, nothing will be more fulfilling than that.
Yeah. And even those friendships. Like, sometimes having to end a friendship because the person's just really not a good influence on you and you're being tempted by the stuff they're doing. Just being like, hey, like, I can't be friends with you because this goes against everything I stand for.
And it's not even like terminating the whole, friendship, I guess, but putting them in a place where there's not as much constant contact. The friendship is different, and when you hang out, you're hanging out with them, but it's more to evangelize and to try and care for their soul. So you don't have to be like, well, I'm never talking to you again, but it's like, I believe this and I'm a Christian. You don't. I would love to talk to you about it, and we can still be friends. But it's not going to be me texting you every day, me hanging out with you every day, me doing this with you every day. There's got to be that line.
Exactly.
And, there's always going to have to be that when it comes to dealing with the world.
Yeah.
So that's the tricky part, is finding where to draw that line. But
when the temptation hits, say no.
Say no. But thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Thank you again to Chris for leaving us that comment. I hope you enjoyed this episode and hope you enjoyed our take on kind of navigating through the world as Christians. For everyone else, if you guys have any topic suggestions, like I said, please feel free to message either of us or leave them on the comments on any of our social medias, the Twitter, Instagram, whatever it may be. We're always looking to hear what you guys want us to talk about. So drop those in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on this video if you haven't already. And we will see you guys on the next episode.